Hello and welcome to our Practical Discipleship Thursday podcast. We're going to be talking about something that I consider very interesting. Maybe you'll find it interesting as well. You know, we hear a lot in our culture here in America, and it seems to be a rising drumbeat of how beautiful socialism is, how beautiful communism may be, how evil and wicked capitalism is as it is expressed here in America. I want to talk to you about that. Is capitalism, is it antithetical to Christianity, or is it complementary? Socialism, communism, we're going to look at all of those today. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to dive into this conversation right now. I've got Pastor Dan with us today and Pastor Eric. And guys, what do you got on this topic? Where do you want to start at?
I would love to hear somebody expound on the evils of capitalism and ask them how that works, you know, when they get to the front of the line at McDonald's.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. When they get to the front of the line at McDonald's. That's right. Eric, any opening thoughts on the idea of capitalism, Christianity, or any of the socioeconomical structures that are embraced today?
Yeah, well, so I was looking at what are the typical arguments against, right? When you want to impose it on Christians that we should go a different direction than capitalism,
right?
What are the typical arguments? And the typical arguments go to motive. And so at the end of the day, if you're trying to legislate motive, you're not going to help yourself. Like it's going to remove every possible scenario. I think we can honestly and earnestly agree at some level. Each system we're presented with as an option has its own flaws, has its own vulnerabilities, right?
Right.
We have the luxury of sitting within capitalism and seeing its flaws and being able to criticize.
Right.
Right. But the people that want to offer new solutions have never tested those solutions. And the people that have tested those solutions end up running their butts right here to America, where we have capitalism and they can be in greater control of their destiny.
That is an inconvenient reality, but yeah, it's true.
So those who actually have tested other methods find themselves pursuing this. Now there are unique groups like Mennonites and the Amish who kind of remove themselves from the grid and pursue self-sustainability, but they still end up having to integrate and use the capitalist system at some point. I think it's the greater path to freedom, but we know with all freedom comes a responsibility to use that freedom well.
Right.
And so to force people through legislation or using the government to impose a different form of a monetary system or a purchasing system is unnatural and is going to cause its own level of rejection and devaluing of somebody at some point, or some service at some point, some product at some point.
Right. So
we just need to be honest enough to recognize there are flaws with all of these. We're in a broken world.
Right.
We are not going to create a perfect system. Looking to the government to create something for us actually takes it out of the hands of the people that believe themselves to be most responsible, most generous, most wise with their money, and ask somebody else to govern that for them, I think is extremely foolish.
And that is also not a model that we see within the context of Christianity. So there's a couple of things. One, I am hearing over and over by a younger, inexperienced, and I'm not trying to be demeaning. I'm just saying I'm hearing this from young folks who don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And it is so prevalent on social media and social media platforms where everyone has been given a voice to share their opinion, which very often and increasingly is inconsistent with reality. But I'm hearing these narratives being perpetuated, and this is why we're doing this. This is why we're talking about it. I hear people decrying the evils and the anti-Christian narratives associated with capitalism. Some of the things that I do hear is people's praise, and I guess this is coming out of our systems of higher education, their praise for socialism. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of taken a different route that I want to kind of see what you guys think about today. I want to look at the community effects, because one thing that we hear is that capitalism lacks compassion for the poor. So I want to do a charitable giving comparison between capitalistic countries and socialistic countries and communistic countries, just to see a true comparison and see if that accusation holds up.
And before we dig in and begin to pick those apart, I think we need to back up. I mean, who are we? I mean, we call this practical discipleship. We're trying to disciple, teach, lead people into understanding the world they live in, within the scope of what Christ teaches. And so when we talk about Christianity and capitalism, I think the big problem is where you have the word ism at the end of the word. Because capital, there's nothing wrong with capital, and that's where Jesus started. And he taught a lot about money and how we approach the subjects of money. And if you go to Matthew 6:24, because we're Christians, we have to lean this way. And what did he teach us? He taught that no man can serve two masters, and basically it's the love of money that causes the problem. You can't effectively serve the growth in your bank account while you're trying to serve God.
Right.
And so now we get to where we can begin to pick that apart, and we begin to look at charity and Christianity and how consistent they are with whether or not we have capital to do the things that you need to do in this world.
So it's not money that's evil. It's the proclivity of the heart of man to the love of money.
Right.
In other words,
that's what Pastor Eric was saying. It comes down to motive.
And that can exist within
within
any and every one.
Right.
In fact, I was kind of looking, and I wanted to start where you are, Dan, as well. So when we look at biblical principles that socialism and communism violate, let's start there. How about that one? And then we'll look at some that may be compatible with capitalism or not. Number one, each should give as he has decided in his heart. This is voluntary generosity, not forced redistribution. And this is one of the biggest arguments. Socialism and communism is not voluntary. It's done, and often to the resentment of the masses who are forced to give disproportionate amounts of their money to do what other people think they should be doing. So when it comes to Christianity, it says again, 2 Corinthians 9:7, that each should give as he decides in his own heart, not under compulsion. Socialism and communism are exactly that because of let's be honest, the brokenness of the human heart. We're selfish, and we're first of all self-concerned. Now, the fact that communism and socialism are often anti-Christian in nature, you're suppressing the very thing that would lead to generosity, and you're using the government as a substitute for the generosity that would be with humans, or that would occur as a result of being Christians. Coerced redistribution through government control. How about this one? Now, this is one that is very important that people may or may not consider. Private property. Private property rights are assumed and protected in the Word of God.
Absolutely.
When we see it in Acts, when Ananias and Sapphira brought their property and gave the money, and they deceived them, but he said, "Was it not yours to do with as you pleased?" It was the idea. We look at it in the book of Exodus 20 and 20:15. We see private property, but we see in the idea of socialism and communism that's not there. It's kind of stripped away. Communism eliminates private property, and the state owns everything. Now, there are massive inherent problems with that. Another couple of things that are anti-scriptural, and I'm not saying that these don't exist within some of the isms of all of them, but it is the personal responsibility, and this is a huge one. The Bible encourages productive labor and self-responsibility, not only in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, but all throughout. Jesus said, or who was it said, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. In other words, there is the expectation of personal effort, not only for our good, but for the good of other people. These are biblical principles. Do I believe that a person can be a Christian within any of these constructs? I do. But socialism may disincentivize work if rewards are not tied to effort. In other words, the merit aspect. The Bible talks about being a steward. He who sows sparingly reaps sparingly. You see all of these principles. And that's in those situations, that's not only unfair to them, it's unfair to the people they're ripping falling off because of laziness or whatever. Again, when you look at de-incentivizing as a corporate structure, I just don't see that there's a whole lot of wisdom or good effects functionally that we see around the world. So I see you guys writing. What you got?
I'm just trying to remember what you said.
Well, so I was going to go to that's personal responsibility goes right along with self-discipline and self-governance. And I don't mean self-governance in the sense like being an anarchist. What I mean is we have a nature, and we go right back to Scripture, for us to look for a ruler over us. We're always trying to find somebody to put between us and God as a mediator for us, because we know we're just bad at things. We know we're lazy at things. And so those that are lazy-minded, those that are not interested in self-discipline, look for somebody else to govern them. And so they're looking for, well, I just need a system in place that takes everything from me to give to somebody else. But usually the mindset, I would say, predominantly the mindset is actually to take from others because I have an unfair lower level of income and or investment. Revenue. And so I need them to fairly take that from somebody else and give it to me. And so we're depending on another entity to steal from, to give to, thinking that we'll be the recipient of. But the majority of us are living in a condition where if we employed this, we'd be giving it up to give to somebody else.
Yeah, so, and the way it's presented, it can sound good in academia, and you can pull on the heartstrings of people. But something Christianity does and this is practical discipleship, is it critiques the sin within any of these systems. And I think that's important. So when we look, the Bible elevates personal responsibility. It says, I must not only take personal responsibility for my behavior, but also the motives behind that behavior. That is something that is promoted, personal responsibility, free will. That what I do because I love God and I love people, not because I'm doing it under compulsion or manipulation. Okay, that is important. Those that critiques, again. The other one is the idea of stewardship. The Bible is all about stewardship. It says you work with your hands. Why? That you might have to give to others, to help. So we're looking at stewardship of personal belongings, of the blessings of God, in our lives, and the distribution even of our wealth. The other one is voluntary charity. Again, it says when you do your alms, don't do them, or you give your gift, don't do it to be seen of people. Don't do it for show or what's the word people use now when you do something. Just it's really kind of some of this new phraseology. Oh, yeah. Anyway, you do something to be seen. It's all virtue signaling. Yeah, there you go. Virtue signaling. See, I'm not that disconnected. Anyway, so the private property idea. Again, and the dignity of work. We should do everything that we do as unto the Lord, not for even some communistic thing. And that's the beauty and some of the things that I don't see as inconsistent within the context of capitalism and Christianity and America as a nation. I know that the terminology of what Christian nationalism and all of that is out there. But the reality of it is, as a Christian, I can absolutely be loyal and committed and love the country that God has placed me in. There is no contradiction, and love God at the same time. I can take responsibility for what that government is doing and how it is behaving, and contribute to or detract from it, and not be at odds with God as a Christian. So, Dan, any insight?
Yeah, man. Let's back up to something you said there. You said the teaching against capitalism and determining it to be evil is a popular and trending thought in academia. But let's think about academia for a moment. Let's think about academia and the concept of Christianity in general. Academia and Christianity don't necessarily go hand in hand. This day. So we're talking about a system and a group, if you will, of people who are consistently far from and getting further from Christ or any concept of practicing Christianity in this world. So when you look back and you begin to look at the hearts of the people around you, surrounded in academia by these people who are far and further from Christ, right? You begin to see the evil that a heart can do, the evil that man can do, and you begin to see this lack of charity within yourself and the people that you surround yourself with. So they look at a system that seeks to get ahead and to be ahead and to do well and to have more so that you can do more as a way of labeling something else as more evil than them,
right,
rather than accepting the responsibility for their own a place in this life which is far from Christ and far from Christian in practice. Yeah. So why would we lean into that? Why would we give that any credence in most conversations? You know, I know we run different circles on social media. You have different people who chase you down than I do.
Different critics than you do.
Absolutely, but Eric talked about hard work, basically. Capitalism, it rewards hard work. It rewards innovation. But hard work and innovation are anything but sinful. Right. They're not inherently sinful, for sure.
No. And they're attributes of, they're the result of being made in the image of God.
Right. But let's take laziness on the other hand, because he mentioned laziness.
Right.
Also, laziness is sinful. It's labeled as sinful when we choose not to do and let someone else take care of us and let someone else meet our responsibilities. Now we are not being who we were designed to be. Yeah. And when we're not being who we're designed to be, we are doing other than God purposes for in this life, and that is sinful.
Yes, slothfulness is anti-Christian. It is anti-God. It's contrary to how God designed us and a result of the brokenness. Eric, do you have something?
Yeah, well, so we always care about, what was God's intention, right? And so we'll go right back to original design before the fall. It says Adam was created for work.
Right.
He had responsibilities.
Yeah, it was stewardship, yes.
The difference was once sin came, then the thistles and the thorns and the lack of return on what was sown, right? The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And the return we've all been looking for leaves us feeling robbed at some level for those that have put in hard work and don't see the return they're looking for. Those that have put in little work and feel like they deserve more. Some of that is a result of living in a sinful world ruled by the one who comes to steal, and he steals it through multiple methods. But we've been handed wisdom through the Word too, right?
Right.
And so one of those, as God talks about money often, one of those warnings is to not be slave to the lender. I think even more so what people don't understand is those that would argue against capitalism actually have probably more of a problem with bad banking, right?
Right.
And so they're building an argument against the system, which the system is actually designed to allow them to succeed. If they've got a good idea, if they can build something good, they can enrich themselves and their family and provide. They can live a healthy life, and at any time they can choose to say, "This is enough. I don't need to pursue the next tax bracket. I don't need to pursue the next biggest house." But we deal with comparison, and we need to pursue the next thing, and we have to have the retirement account up to $2 million and all this stuff. So the world again imposes that imprisonment, that enslavement to you have to pursue this next thing or you're not safe. You have to pursue this next thing or anything could happen and topple your home. So instead of relying on bad banking and borrowing, we should invoke God's principles, and we should be responsible and wise with our money. We should save and purchase only what we can afford.
Right.
We should come together with those with shared interest and purchase and buy and spend money on the things that matter, not on the things that don't. But we end up chasing everything in this world like a bunch of kids on a June evening looking, chasing down lightning bugs, right? We're just like, oh, that's shiny. I want these things, instead of worried about the basics in life.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I mean, hey, look, I love that we help people. And I have probably one of the bigger bleeding hearts in the office because I hear those phone calls all the time, the calls for benevolence. But the reality is, if people were responsible with their money and they worked just a decent amount of hours in a week, they probably wouldn't need to call for benevolence, but they're spending their money on whatever, and then they ask us for help for their electric bill.
Right.
They spend money on whatever, and then they ask us to help, give them some money so they can put diapers on their kid.
Right.
And that's not just poor people calling the church. Like, I deal with this with family members. This is not an indictment on a certain group of people. This is a lack of wisdom and self-discipline that exists within mankind, right? But the more shiny things around us, the more we end up throwing our money at those things versus our basic needs.
Yeah.
And then we find ourselves going back to that bad banking system that just prints money, and then the boogeyman is capitalism.
Right.
Right. Well, if we were under a different financial system here, then that would be the next boogeyman. But there's all these other aspects in here.
Right.
So
the idea that a lot of the things that people are decrying against capitalism are the same things they would, accuse Christianity of. The question is, and here's what is interesting to me, they are, defaming capitalism in a lot of this, the social media platforms based upon a moral perspective. They are saying that capitalism is immoral. Now, don't get me wrong; these are the same people who are okay with abortion and and all kinds of crazy deviant sexual behavior and crazy, other stuff, but they're decrying capitalism as immoral. And I want to address this issue specifically because of the greed associated with it. Because of the greed that they are saying is inherent to capitalism. Now, I want to address that issue with some facts here. And this is where I started to jump into it earlier. We're going to jump into it now. So I want to look at really what is happening in capitalism as opposed to socialism, communism, atheism, and materialism. So I want us to take a look at the moral argument that capitalism, because I believe it is a condition of a man's heart, but I believe that the condition of a man's heart is allowed to flourish for good much more so under capitalism than it would under socialism and communism. And let's look at the facts. Let's have an intellectually honest conversation. So let's look at charitable giving by country, capitalist versus socialist.
Sure.
Okay, can we go there? So in capitalist-led economies like the United States, charitable donation reached 2.1% of GDP. That is in 2022, for example, that was $410 billion in unforced charitable giving in, comparative. So let's look at social democratic nations such as Sweden, Germany, France, typically give between, listen to this, 0.1 and 0.3% compared to 2.1% of capitalists. So when you look at giving, at benevolence towards what is seen as felt needs, there is no comparison. It is almost 200% more, even though it's only 2%. In God's economy, if we take Christianity and we connect that with capitalism, when we break this down to believers in America, in this society, as opposed to unbelievers, we see that charitable giving among atheists and Christians there is a massive difference, which tells me, again, it is not necessarily just the system. You say,
right.
Well, then one is no better than the other. Actually, that's not true. One is much more conducive to the other because when you look at the GDP of these nations compared to capitalist and socialist and communist, the GDP to give a percentage of is
higher.
It's a lot less.
Oh, you're talking about for them. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot higher here in capitalism. It's almost as if, it's blessed.
Well, we have more to give from.
Yeah,
right?
so when we compare atheists and humanists to Christians, and we get back to the heart of man, because I believe there are people who are communist in nature and socialistic in nature and who love those ideas associated with that, maybe for what they believe are good reasons, but they are not God reasons. So we look and we compare those. There is a religious affiliation. I'll just give you this: non-religious affiliation giving as opposed to religious affiliation. In other words, these are people who volunteer and give. Religious Americans average $2,210,000 in donations and 12 volunteer opportunities per year.
Did you say that number again?
Yeah, religious Americans average $2,210 per year in donations and 12 volunteer events versus 642 and 5.8 events for secular folks. Now, another study when we look at religious affiliation was higher. Either way, it's more than 4 times or more than 3 times.
Yeah, it's about 3.5.
3.5 times more giving from those who are associated with who claim to be Christians,
and more than double in service,
and more than double in service. Now, there are again humanist organizations that are set up just for that, to give to certain needs, and that would be any from supporting LGBTQ to hurricane victims. When we look at that and we call that humanist, it's a little more equitable, but still not even close. Like the Foundation for Beyond Relief, a humanist giving platform, has raised over $3.6 million since 2009. So we're looking at that as if that's a lot, but that absolutely pales in comparison. And also, again, the causes are a lot different. So very often we see those causes promoting things that are not necessarily good or conducive for community growth in the area of finances or anything else. So there are some amazing snapshots out there that just shine light on this. So some key takeaways from this is, as capitalist societies consistently show higher private charitable giving as a share of their GDP, and the GDPs are notably higher. Religious individuals give significantly more by volume and frequency than secular or atheist individuals in U.S.-based comparisons. So we're seeing these arguments that people have from a humanistic perspective against socialism, and the ones that are often shared against Christianity do not show, listen to this, the compassion that they say they have to cast aspersions against capitalism and Christianity. And I'm not lumping capitalism and Christianity together. I'm just saying Christianity flourishes within a capitalistic context. Communists and socialism always end up being religiously oppressive, unless they are ran by a religion. We would be talking about Islam and and that type of thing. So when we look at these arguments and we look at the functionality of it, sometimes the best of intentions, when ill-informed, are not, they don't produce the best results.
Yeah. And I think that's fair, right? Like, it's good for us to extend that grace to those that are making that argument. They have good intentions. They think they've got the solution to fix the problem. But we get really focused on one problem. And we think, I have to figure out the solution to this, and then we create another 3 problems in attempting to do so. And just through historical experience, not just my lifetime, but as recorded and as stated by Jesus in our devotional this morning, you will always have the poor with you. There will always be somebody without.
Right.
There will always be somebody with less than. And no matter how hard we attempt to make up for that, they have a responsibility, or their family has a responsibility, as kind of pointed out, that it's a responsibility of a family to take care of a widow or children, orphans, right? So there is a responsibility within that closer circle to take care of, and to rely on somebody from across the country to contribute to the fund of that person. It's great that we have GoFundMe and those fundraising opportunities for when your heartstrings are pulled.
But some of the stuff they're
mandate it, exactly. But to mandate those things, and I think here's another thing is the idea that somehow capitalism is worse than or evil compared to other systems is the lie that all work is equal. Right? Like Dan brought up going to McDonald's earlier. Look, I worked at McDonald's my senior year in high school.
Right.
That is not the same work for, a sergeant in the Army, or for a pastor, or for the guys that are out there building I-295 right now. There's different levels of work that require different risk, different level of education, different level of commitment,
and therefore merit different levels of pay.
Exactly,
and commitment.
They're contributing to society, and something's being extracted and required of them at a greater level.
Now, McDonald's really contributes to my society.
Hey, don't get me wrong.
So there are, I want to look at biblical warnings that are universally applicable, okay, because this is practical discipleship. And I think this is important. Before I jump into some of these and how they will apply and what you would have to watch out for under capitalism, socialism, or communism from a biblical perspective, Dan, what do you want to bring? Anything?
Nothing. At the risk of derailing anything, I'd like to hear what you got here.
Good. I thought this was pretty interesting. So when I want to look at the biblical warning, I want to look at the weaknesses that you would see from each one. So the biblical warning, the Bible reads, warns consistently against greed. Under capitalism, that could lead to unchecked wealth hoarding. Okay, because we see that people can get a lot, but some of the most generous and most giving are the richest people, not the poor people. I'm just saying that there's truth for that. In socialism and communism, greed and power hoarding by the ruling elite. See, that's the problem. When we look at these other systems, you have a very few people telling a whole bunch of people what the best is for. So those are biblical warnings and things that we would watch out for. The other one would be exploitation of others. You say, well, capitalism is right with exploitation. Business owners may underpay workers. Here in America, we have minimum wage and government intervention and some of those other things. In capitalism, like you said, the demand of the job, how many people can cook a burger as opposed to how many people can build a computer. There's a little difference. But so business owners may underpay workers, and in socialist and communist contexts, governments may exploit citizens and restrict their freedoms according to their whims. The beauty of America is it is not just a capitalistic society. We are a republic. And the beauty of America as a grand experiment is that all of the rights that you have and that I have is acknowledged by our government as not coming from our government. So our government is the only one on the face of the earth that I know of that says these rights that you have are God-given, and we are here to make sure as a government that you retain those God-given rights, and nobody or no one comes in, even the government, and takes those God-given rights away. That is a grand experiment that has led to the blessing of God in this nation. And that's why I look at that and go, wow, I don't see Christian nationalism as this horrible thing. I see it as the nationalism as in the context that we're in, something where Christianity can simply flourish. Yeah. So the materialism. Now that we know the Bible warns against materialism, consumerism can become idolatrous. That's what you were talking about.
Absolutely.
That's the shiny.
That's the shiny thing.
Because it is so available, it is so prevalent.
Look, I want a boat, I want a house, I want a jet ski,
But does lack of opportunity or availability for those things take the desire out of your heart?
Say that again.
In other words, just because I can't get it, does that take the greed for it away? No. I've seen greedy poor people who don't have two dimes rubbed together, greedier than rich people, and when you look at what they're giving and how they're living life. So when it comes to capitalism and socialism, materialism, consumerism can become idolatrous. State-driven envy and redistribution can idolize material equality. All of the sudden, you're turning the haves and the have-nots against each other, to leverage them. So, and we know that there's generally not equity when it comes to,
there won't. We'll always have poor people. We'll always have rich people. It doesn't matter whether it's in a capitalist society, whether it's the leaders in a communist party, whether it's oligarchy. It doesn't matter. Like, somebody's going to get their hands on the multitude of riches,
right?
And they're going to. But that's the one cool thing about capitalism, has created this scenario where if you were born with to parents who had two dimes, they could, like that's all they had. Like, you can grow yourself out of that. You can work hard and get to a place where you experience financial freedom. You have room within your budget to bless others and be benevolent.
You're not on a fixed income unless you want to be.
Literally, physical and mental ability are about the two only great limiters per person, right?
Right.
But the field that exists within the capitalist society creates a ladder for anyone to choose to decide how high do I want to climb on that ladder, and at any time I can choose to get off. But we live in a system that tells us we don't need to get off. We have to go to the next rung.
Right.
But we need to get comfortable with saying, I'm good right here. Somebody else can pursue the promotion. Somebody else can pursue the raise.
Godliness with contentment is great gain.
And we'll be comfortable here. We won't overstretch ourselves beyond our means, and my wife and my kids will know what it is to just be at a decent place,
right?
But our culture does not breed that. We need the church to demonstrate and encourage and teach that that's good and that's healthy.
Because Christian culture does breed that within, again, any of these. So greed is something that is dealt with and addressed within the context of Christianity, not necessarily no ism, as Dan said before, is the solution. They all have their challenges. Exploitation of others, Bible is against it. In any socioeconomical structure. But materialism, how about the neglect of the poor? Again, this is often the accusation. The wealthy may ignore the needy. Centralized systems often fail to deliver the promise of equity. So socialism and communism fail to work because of the human element. The same human element is available when wealthy people ignore the needs of other people. The wealthy may ignore the needs of the needy. If they don't take the biblical responsibility. It says, to him who is given much, God requires much. So, the neglect of the poor. But those, again, are offset not by any ism, except Christianity.
I want to point out one more thing that exists within our culture that is, I think, easier to exist within this culture. It's not limited to the capitalistic design, but forgiveness of debts. See, when the business or the person is reaping enough benefits from everybody else who is earnestly and honestly paying their bills and making their payments, they have enough within the profit margin to say, look, this person who isn't able to, we're going to be able to forgive that debt. We're going to be able to relieve that person. And that's biblical grace and mercy right there. One of the examples I was looking up online is like, okay, so again, what are we advocating for is a Jubilee method of like basically, hey, you take out a debt, your debts are forgiven every 7 years. That doesn't apply to every situation, right? Like, good luck taking out a 30-year mortgage and then, getting like if you applied for a 6-year mortgage, most people wouldn't be able to afford it. Right. That takes us back to bad banking and bad principles in the first place. Like, so there's things that are compounding and leaning on each other in this, but within most of those other systems, you don't see the opportunity for forgiveness of debt.
I would like to see,
because they're depending on you to pay that debt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would like to see how much debt is forgiven by American companies each year.
Okay.
So I'm going to hold that in queue. Let me hit these last two, and then I'm going to chat GPT that one really quick. So anyway, the neglect of the poor. The other one is power concentration. In a capitalistic society, it can become monopolies. Now we have laws against that, and antitrust laws and things like that. In state bureaucracies with little accountability, in socialist and communistic structures. You're talking about who is holding them accountable. There are no checks and balances, and the people don't have a voice other than riot in the street and coup. So the other one is injustice and corruption in markets lacking regulation. Most of the markets in America are highly regulated. Is there corruption? Yes, because there are people. In other systems where dissent and free speech are suppressed, socialist and communistic regimes often have mass suppression, and freedom of speech is not a thing, especially in the area of Christianity. We have the thought police now in Europe. You can't even pray silently in front of an abortion clinic. Imagine that. Yeah. You're telling me I can't pray silently in front of abortion clinic. It's ludicrous. It's crazy. Anyway, I got to find the answer to that question just to see how much debt, because one of the big accusations that we hear is big companies and big corporations and how greedy they are and how much they do and all of this. I would love to see, and maybe we don't have time for that today, but maybe we're able to look at some point and maybe revisit this, but it looks in 2019, 4% of all profits were written off, with approximately 43 million borrowers per year receiving some type of write-off. I mean, think about that. Now, I'm not saying they're not doing it for tax reasons. I can't look at their motives, but I'm looking here going, this is absolutely amazing. $78.5 billion for over 1 million borrowers seems to have been written off. This is in public service loans and forgiveness and those type of things. Consumer debt forgiveness, $30 billion to $40 billion per year written off. And yet, people are going, hey, these guys are in it for nothing but the money. If they were in it for nothing but the money, they would have laws so strict that put you in jail instead of writing it off. That would make you in forced labor camps.
And the alternative to borrowing, right, is either you buy it from the one who's capable of loaning in a capitalist society, or you buy it from the authority, the government,
right,
or borrow it, right? Well, okay, so look at college loans. Do those get forgiven even when promised? No.
Right.
The method is not there. Why? Because those that are in governance, they have a responsibility to the taxpayer to collect that money back. But the person who is lending out of their generosity has the ability to cancel the debt at any time because they've also made a profit. So
this is an interesting, the one was we saw recently with the kid who killed the man who killed the CEO, and because of the absolute out of hand corporate greed. Well, when we look at corporate greed, or we say corporate greed, we can't look at people ripping people off, people cheating the system, people doing things. Just consider the medical debt forgiveness. Listen to this. This is amazing. $10 billion of medical debt forgiveness
a year.
That is unbelievable. This is a select few, so which tells me it gets higher. But this is hospital charitable write-offs, or even higher than that when we add those in. That is absolute. But you don't hear that because it doesn't fit the narrative. So let's wrap this up. And Dan, closing thoughts. I see you're writing some things. I want to get that, but
yeah, medical debt forgiveness, education debt forgiveness. There are so many things that really are rabbit holes. We could go all down these rabbit holes. Right. We could take people down those trails and begin to chase these things one at a time and find ourselves way over there,
right,
where we didn't intend to be. But at the end of the day, I want to lead people well, not down some rabbit hole. And I think we need to back up to the one place where those who decry and those who stand with capitalism agree, and that's a society that would build its financial structure, its financial mark of stability on a credit score, is a bad thing. When it says we trust in that a little too much,
right?
Saying that because we know to have a good credit score, you have to borrow money. You have to be in debt to someone.
You have to play the game first.
So whether that system is there to exploit people who need more, or whether it's there to provide more for those who want to get more, it could be a problem. It can be problematic, but. Right. That's where we begin to agree, those who would be for and against capitalism. But let me tell you this, I'm able to do what I'm able to do and have what I have because I invested wisely. I invested based on Christian principles by the great prophet Dave Ramsey. And it turns out that his biblical principles were very effective, and it allowed me to accumulate. But I had to accumulate with the willingness to give it to someone else, to do something with that to the benefit of someone else. And I've been able to do that, and I'm still able to do that. But it's as a result of following biblical Christian principles in how I look at money and how I treat money. I know people who have boats and jet skis, all the things that Eric has greed for, But I also know them to be very benevolent people.
Amen.
So you can do both. We are rewarded for hard work and innovation, but there comes with that, like Pastor Eric mentioned, a responsibility, and that is to do well in the sight of the Lord. So you can do both. Christianity and capitalism, they're not competing systems. Yeah. They coexist so well.
Yeah. So you're saying the beauty of it is Promotion comes from the Lord, regardless of the context or the culture. Christ is really in charge. Christian principles are not just Christian principles. They are godly principles that work in God's creation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like one of you said a moment ago, something about we have laws, or there are laws that, well, we have laws for lots of things, but that doesn't make people do them, or it doesn't make them right or wrong.
Amen.
It means we have laws. We have guardrails.
We have guardrails. Yeah, no, beautiful. Eric?
I think it all goes back to a sin. Our dissatisfaction with whatever system we find ourselves in is going to exist. Move countries, you're going to find a problem with that country. It doesn't, like, that's not the issue. We can't fix this broken world. We can try, don't get me wrong, but we're going to fall short. We're always going to have somebody left out. And if we're looking for everybody to feel like they got the fair end of the deal, that they're equal with everybody else, that is a utopian pursuit that will not exist in this world, and it's a fool's errand. Much better to pursue to gain all you can, so you can give all you can and make up the difference that you see out there.
Right.
Instead of imposing it on somebody else, take action. If you see something wrong, take action on it.
Yes.
Make that your responsibility. That's why it's been shown to you in the first place.
Amen.
Instead of getting mad and forcing somebody else to get in your train and do the work for you.
Yeah. So we're not looking to leverage other people's mechanisms to fulfill our agenda. So maybe you're one of those people and you say, well, I am filled with compassion and I am fed up with corporate greed and what other people aren't doing that they should be doing. I would encourage you, take the Christian view, take the Christian perspective and ask, what am I doing? Am I doing what I can to do? Am I out holding a sign in protest and trying to tear something down? Or am I working with my own hands, that's what the Bible says, in order to be able to give to those who are in need? You see, one of those works, one of those builds yourself and builds others and builds good in the community. The other one becomes something that is destructive. So let me help you. Satan, or the enemy, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. You know, Christ came that we might have life, and life more abundantly. I would encourage you, become that purveyor, become that fertile ground that God can use to bring life and goods, whatever it looks like, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, health to the life of others. Anyway, thank you so much. That's practical discipleship in a